Everybody, thanks for joining us today, and excited to share some things with you, go through some training about solar, and we're going to go over a few different things, but I'm grateful for the opportunity you guys have given me to share this with you. I know your guys' time is valuable and precious, and I appreciate that. So we'll try to fill this with some valuable content that hopefully you can walk away with better understanding solar homes and solar systems and how it impacts the real estate transaction. So we appreciate InterNACHI inviting us to this, and we're excited to share this with the InterNACHI community. All right, so let's dive in. Today, we're going to cover a few different topics. We're going to talk about how solar systems work as a part of, and the different parts of a solar system. We're going to go through the equipment, and we're going to learn to identify and comment on solar problems that you can observe visually as you're on site inspecting a system. So our goal here is to give everybody fundamental knowledge about solar, and so that way you know what we're looking at and the best way to handle the challenges that do come up around solar, especially when it goes wrong. And the last thing we're going to cover is talk a little bit about Sprk. That's my company that I founded around this. And then, help you understand about adding solar as a add-on service with Sprk. And so that will be kind of the end, and hopefully just a cherry on top to the content today, but hopefully this is something valuable that everybody takes away from the training. Okay, so just a little bit about what we're doing with solar and what's happening with it. Basically, I got into this because after being a solar installer and in the solar industry for about 15 years, almost going on 15 years now, found that there's a lot of problem with solar. So I'm a licensed agent. I'm a licensed contractor in a couple different states, and I'm a NABCEP certified installer. So I've got quite a bit of experience both on selling solar, on solar operations, and then installing solar and the different challenges that come up with that. And so we're going to cover a few of those different topics today. But the reason I founded Sprk back in 2021, it's been about 4 years now that I've been doing this, was to support homeowners post-install, because there hasn't been a whole lot of post-install support for homeowners in the solar industry. Most of the company's objective is to get the glass up on the roof. That's what they call it. But getting more panels on the roof, so then, set it and forget it. Never talk to that homeowner again. So that's really our purpose. Now, most of what we do is training and providing resources to those in the real estate transaction. So inspectors, agents, and appraisers. For the last several years, we've built resources and tools for each of them. And we're going to talk about mostly kind of the discovery of the challenges today. We'll talk a little bit about the resources, but more, I want to help everybody get a fundamental understanding about it. These are some of the companies that we already work with in the inspection space. Obviously, we would love to work with more companies, but we've trained thousands of inspectors now on this process, and excited to add you guys, into the fold of those that have been trained here. Now, what our objective for this, and this is really why I got into solar, was to create a bridge between these two industries. The solar and the real estate industry has got a significant problem in that no one has left my side of the industry with solar and bridge the gap between these two. And this has actually caused a significant problem in real estate transactions. And for inspectors, that shows up in the form of not really knowing what we're looking at. And so we're disclaiming it most of the time for inspectors. But there's a myriad of problems. And so our objective with Sprk has been, and really the goal here today is to help create and provide some applied knowledge for you guys. So this training is very much directed toward you as inspectors. But we have other trainings that we provide, and even we provide them to inspectors to give to agents, for example, about how does solar impact the real estate transaction and them as a professional. And so that's our goal here, is that as we work with proficient and top rate professionals in the real estate industry, that we can truly bridge this gap and create synergy between the two industries, because solar is definitely here. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. We'll kind of get into that as we start to learn about some of the aspects of it and the equipment and whatnot. But absolutely, this is something that is going to impact everybody. So having some good, like clear knowledge around this is the objective here. So that's what we're going to try to walk away from today. Hopefully you can take this, apply it to your business, and again, help to start bridging the gap between these two industries and be a part of this process as we do bridge that gap. But essentially, one of the fundamental things that we like to do is provide you as inspectors the resources that you need to go out and share this with the agents in your own networks, because the agent education, while it's a little bit different, man, it's critical for what they need to be able to get in front of the clients that they're wanting to represent and help them with the challenges that they're representing both on the buy and the sell side. Now, as inspector, we've got the standard of service, and I know a lot of inspectors have added additional service. Those ancillary services are great for providing additional value to clients, but definitely, like, there is our traditional inspections that looks at the key parts and components of the home. What our objective here is that now that so many solar homes are popping up, we want to give you what really buyers do need, and really like the ability to look at one of the core parts of the home now that is showing up in about 10% of owned homes in America. And so with this is something that's highly expensive, something that is definitely not, like I said, going anywhere. And so the ability to look at that and provide good data on that is really important for buyers, because nobody wants to inherit the seller's expensive problems, just like any other part of the home. So that's our goal here, is so that coming away from this, that you guys will know what we're looking at here. Now, one of the reasons that we do focus so much on inspectors is because of this fact right here. When I created a lot of the resources that are in Sprk, because I'm the founder, I'm the one that started this movement, and it came from like a place of pain. I honestly did not think that this statistic right here would have been the fact. But about 30% of the time, we are finding that there is a lot of issues that should be addressed in a real estate transaction when it comes to problems discovered with the solar inspection. So this is an issue that, and these are a lot of the problems are really things that can be fairly easily resolved, but it can be very expensive for a buyer to inherit, these kind of problems. But 30% of the time, I would never have expected that inspections would have revealed these level of issues. If you would have asked me before I started doing the number of inspections we're doing and created the resource, I would have said maybe 1 to 5% of the time we would find the issues that we're finding, but about 30% of the time, definitely there is some real challenges. And what it comes down to is, again, that can be really expensive for a buyer. And so, like, this is one of those issues. We're going to go through top 10 issues that you guys encounter in a real estate transaction. And I want to make sure that you guys have what you need going into this, so that way we're able to provide that. Now, I had showed a QR code earlier. I'm actually going to back up a little bit so I can show that again. So this QR code, if you're wanting to get some notes and follow along, I've actually created an ebook for you guys that like takes and takes this first part here that we're going to go through, the system functionality and whatnot. And that way you can, if you've got a phone or something, we want to make sure that everybody's got the ability to do that. So sorry, I didn't mention this earlier. I just kind of blew past this slide, but that is a good resource if you're wanting to learn more about this so that you're not having to like take screenshots or take photos every single one of these slides. Pretty much all of the content that we're going to go over today is inside of that little ebook that we put together for you guys, Solar in the Inspection. So that's what that QR code is there. Sorry, I didn't, like I said, I kind of missed that earlier. So hopefully everybody got a chance to snap a photo of that. I'll give you another second to grab that. And okay, let's move on. All right, so let me kind of get back to where we were. Okay, so now with this, basically there's some key challenges, like I said, that do show up in the transaction. And a lot of it has to do with the adoption rate. So solar really got going in the US, in about 2010. And now we've seen about 10% of, again, owned homes in the US that have gone solar. The projection is by 2030 will be at 15%, or by 2035 that will be at 20%. Obviously, those are projections, but and there's lots of different factors that may impact that. But what we found is that the number one driver of solar adoption and whether people go solar or not is typically not what they think. Like most people would think, like, I'm from Arizona, that's where I'm based out of. And we help inspectors do this all over the country. But most people think like, man, Arizona's got to have the highest numbers. And what we find though is that it's really not the number of sun hours or people's political orientation or the other things I think that are assumptive about why people go solar, but it's all based off the cost of electricity. And as the cost of electricity continues to increase because of all these other factors like AI data centers and the growing demand of electricity, as there's a higher demand for it, we're seeing record increases per year in the cost of electricity. So we would anticipate that this grid parity number, which is when finance solar or lease solar is equal to or the same price as the local utility bill. So when those are the same or the local utility bill is higher, that's where we see higher adoption rates. And so from a national standpoint, this is a good map here that breaks down two key numbers. So I'll show you this. And this was taken about 2 years ago. So these actually numbers are probably a little bit higher than this now. But this shows a breakdown of state by state. So if you're able to look at, find your market, where you're at, this kind of shows where I was talking about, where you probably would not anticipate the number of solar homes that there are. For example, most people would not anticipate that in Massachusetts, almost 20% of homes have solar on them because it's in the Northeast and, maybe there's not as much sun there or whatever. But what it comes down to is Massachusetts has higher electricity than what it would cost to go solar, or that it would cost to stay, or it's more expensive to stay with the local utility than it is to go solar in many instances. And so we see high adoption rates. So the places where we see more solar, like right now, over the last 3 years, Texas has been the #1 fastest growing state for solar adoption. And some may think that that's only because of the growing real estate market there. But really what it comes down to is solar pricing, or the utility pricing, has driven post, the 2021 winter crisis that Texas had that ended up killing like 700 or 800 people. That Texas then changed their whole energy policy from low cost to as reliable as power as possible. So they went from affordability to reliability. And that is typically a cost gap. And that's where electricity in Texas went from 12 cents to 24 cents, like over a couple of years. And so those kind of increases drive adoption. And that's where, as we see more and more people going solar, right, then that's something that's definitely should be addressed when we're looking at the general market. But especially in certain states, there are going to be more solar than not. So hopefully, though, if you see like your state, if you're in, one of the states that maybe is not as high concentration of solar, for example, like in Louisiana, there's 2.5%. But in New Orleans, there's actually a much higher concentration because New Orleans ran some incentives that actually got a lot more people. So a lot of the solar is concentrated in Louisiana. So there are pockets of it where it's definitely more versus others. And there's other factors that do drive it, like net metering, which is the exchange of power with the utility, which we'll cover here shortly. But I just want to kind of give some reference and some context about why people are going solar and what that looks like. And so again, too, I think AJ had mentioned this, but if you guys have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I've invited AJ to chime in with those as those come up. Usually there's questions and comments around that. So if you guys do have questions, I'm happy to answer those as we're going through this. Okay, so that's really what's happening in the US market right now with solar. Now, if we look at our neighbors to the north of us, Canada, we've actually seen over the last couple of years, they're surging as well with solar adoption. And so there is definitely a trend toward this across the board. But for sure, there are certain states like California, that's, half of the population. Every new build in California right now is mandated to have solar panels on them when it is constructed to pass permitting in the state of California. So there is different markets that are adopting different rates. And that's, again, just some different things that are happening. But for sure, wherever the cost of electricity is highest, that's where we see the highest concentrations of solar. Okay, now that there is so much solar out there, what's happening with that? So since 2010, this is like what, as I've been helping people go solar. And in 2000, to me, that 21 was that trigger event for me to like find out like what is going on here. Why are there so many people pushing back against the solar industry in the real estate industry, especially agents? That's what got me into it. There was a lot of agents that were like frustrated and then telling their clients to cancel going solar. And as a business owner, I was losing money big time. And that was frustrating. And so I dove in and I did not understand the scope of the problem. And this is what I've learned over the last several years and how it impacts the real estate transaction. What we find is that post install, homeowners are not thinking about their solar much. And oftentimes when it comes to sell the home, they don't have the documentation readily available. They don't really understand what's up there. They sat down with a solar guy years ago and now they're transacting and they're like, I don't know where any documents are. I don't even know how well it's working or not. And so that translates over to the listing agent. If they can't provide them that, it's very difficult for that listing agent to then, understand what to do with it, how to showcase it, how to market it. It's like anyways, and they just basically end up kind of flummoxed as to what to do with it. And then that really starts a cascade of problems because the listing agent is largely the quarterback that really gets things going in whether this can be a successful transaction or not. Now, what happens on the buy side is buyers then come in, they'll look at a home, and if there's loans or leases, whether those disclosed or not, like that creates challenges, what the process. How do we make decisions on this? Who's paying it off? How is it impacting escrow? Anyway, or equity. Like there's a lot of that really can flummox people. Obviously, you as inspectors, if you're not trained on it, if you don't have the tools for it, you disclaim it. I mean, bottom line, you don't want to be, trying to inspect something that you don't understand because it opens you up to some liability, and that can be problematic. Appraisers are very similar. If they don't have the data that they need, then they won't be able to add in the solar into the appraisal accurately. And they definitely, like to cover themselves and not overextend and try to guess on something. So with good data, they'll add it in. If they don't, then they won't. And so at the end of the day, in this ecosystem, that buyer ends up suffering because nobody's really like giving them the resources they need to understand this asset that's on the home that's saving them or it could be hundreds of dollars a month, or that's worth 30, 40, 50, even $100,000. Like we see some quite large, quite valuable systems out there. And this is not every time, but this is the vast majority of the real estate industry and how they're treating it. And so our goal here is to provide resources around this that solve this. So today we're going to be talking about you guys and inspectors and giving you, again, that applied knowledge so you know what you're looking at. All right. So the way that this shows up, again, these problems are kind of like on the agent side, because that ends up flowing into how it impacts you guys. When it's not showcased in the listing, buyers end up making lower offers, sellers end up suffering. When documentation's not there, it ends up causing renegotiations. And that's pretty frustrating because, if you're any, or the next one, like undisclosed loans or leases, if you're an agent and you lose $10,000 because of this, it is very frustrating. But if it's not inspected, again, the buyer can assume some expensive problems or issues, especially if the information's not provided or gathered and provided, that could make those very inexpensive. Because a lot of solar problems that could be expensive, actually, when the inspection is performed, can actually become inexpensive now because of a clear understanding of how the warranties work and the documentation to be able to provide servicing to those kind of challenges. So what a lot of this comes down to is instead of just looking at this only from an equipment standpoint, because we're going to get into that, but I just wanted to kind of frame the importance of why some of this matters. And this is, again, one of those things that really impacts whether how things are transferred. And this is on the agent side where things get really sticky, is the transfer of solar contracts and solar ownership. Now, every solar system's got 1 to 4 contracts that are tied to it, that ties the homeowner, the homeowner to the home and the solar. So there's this binding force that keeps these people together. And so when those aren't transferred correctly, that's when things go awry. And this is what lands people in court over this. This is what causes problems in renegotiations. I mean, all sorts of issues. So let me just briefly describe what we're looking at here. There are these 4 different contract types. There's financing contracts. These are your leases, your loans, and your PPAs. PPA stands for Power Purchase Agreement. And leases and loans and PPAs, those are really what determine whether it's owned outright, whether it's the method of ownership. But those are really important, and it's these things that determine whether there's a lien against it or not, which then can impact whether it's equitable. In other words, whether it would add equity or not. So it's really important to understand those. Next up is the installation contracts. Okay, the installation contracts are the solar installer or the battery installer that put the equipment on the home, those have either the workmanship warranty in them and a description of the equipment and when it was installed. But that workmanship warranty, it usually translates into leak warranty, because if there's leaks, is that going to be covered by the installer or not? Is that installer in business or not? Because there's a growing trend that unfortunately many of my colleagues in the solar industry have thrown the towel in, and now they're out of business. And those warranties, those are no longer available, but many are still in business. So like, are they in business or not? Are those warranties present or not? Most of those on average are between 5 and 10 years on those leak warranties from the point of installation. But they are separate from the equipment warranties. So panel warranties, inverter warranties, battery warranties, those are all separate. And what's neat about solar, like there are some of the HVAC manufacturers that when the home sells, that warranty does not transfer no matter what from buyer or from seller to buyer. In solar, they do transfer that warranty with the equipment because it's tied to the equipment, not the owner of the home. And so this is one of those areas where it's really nice to know, hey, you know what? This has got end phase. These are microinverters. This system is only 10 years old. It's only, marginally working. Hey, these are still under warranty. We can get those replaced. Understanding those kind of pieces of information are really helpful, because as a unbiased third party looking at the home and looking at the system, then, you've got really a key piece of information that can either, save that buyer a lot of money, or they could end up, costing them quite a bit if they want to salvage it, or some people might even try to take it off. And so, I'll hopefully explain why that's not a good idea either. But we want to, just be clear about this, that these two are separate. And even if, solar company ABC goes out of business, solar company XYZ can still service the warranty. And even some of those warranties cover labor costs. Now, it doesn't always cover all labor costs or every company's service fee or dispatch fee out to the home, but they oftentimes do reimburse at least some of them. So it's one of those things that understanding this, that those two can be broken up, that there are solutions there, even though it may seem scary. And so again, it's just a fundamental understanding of this that really is helpful. The last agreement type is a net meter agreement. The net metering agreement is an agreement between the homeowner and the utility company. These two parties have an exchange of electricity. So what happens is the solar will generate electricity, the excess goes back to the utility company, and then that they'll buy it back from them, or they'll credit them their account. It's called net billing or net metering. There's two different forms of it, but essentially for the intents and purposes for this training, we're just going to call it net metering. And in that exchange, that's the storage medium for the solar, because solar works during the day, not at night. But that medium of exchange with the local utility is the credit exchange, in that is what does help people to store. So they don't have to have batteries on site. The utility net meter agreement serves as that battery, if you will, because the excess is going out of their home, going back to the utility. They're crediting their account. So that way later, when they do need power from them, like at night, they can use those credits they built up. So that's just a little bit about those agreements and how that works. And again, I know that's kind of high level. When we get into the agent training, when I'm training agents, or when we give that to the Sprk certified inspectors, that is one of those pieces that really is a critical part of that education, because it is this screen right here that fouls up agents all over the place, and why generally they don't like solar. So, these are the ownership methods that, there's 4 of them. The first is owned solar with solar that is owned outright by the homeowner. Okay. And again, what we're talking about here is what impacts the system repairs and system equity. Okay. So does it impact the equity? If the owned solar, the way that it's defined is that the system is owned outright by the homeowner or the solar installer, if they're still in business and that they're still under warranty, they are responsible for any repairs needed to the system or repairs or damage caused by the system to the home under that initial workmanship warranty. Okay, so that's in the owned solar method. Now, if it's owned with a loan, exactly the same thing. You basically have that. The difference between owned outright and owned with a loan is that when you have a loan, there's no equity typically attributed to the system, because it turns out, Fannie and Freddie and FHA, HUD, all those guys, they don't really want to lend against a product that already has a loan against it. And so they don't like to lend 2 products against the same, or 2 different finance vehicles against the same product. And so that's where owned outright will be typically the only one as it's conveyed that will actually attribute to the added appraised value of the home. But when it comes to system repair responsibility, whether it's owned or has a loan on it, either way, it's a responsibility of the homeowner or their installer if they're still around and if it's still under warranty. Now, the third method, lease solar or solar PPA, this is when someone else owns the solar. So this system, the solar system, is no longer owned by the solar or by the homeowner. Okay, that solar is installed by a third party, the lease company or the PPA company. They put that solar on the roof. Now, the energy that this system produces is then benefiting the homeowner, and that benefit is like what they're getting from it. And so because of that, they own the equipment. They're responsible for the repairs. Okay, so for those repairs, that's a critical thing. The reason we understand this is at the very end, we're going to go over maintenance and differentiate between maintenance and repairs, because a lot of solar is sold with the idea that leased or PPA systems, you don't have to do any maintenance on your systems. And so I want to differentiate between maintenance and repairs, which we will get to toward a little bit later in the presentation. But that's those are the two different the two different styles, is owned outright or owned by the homeowner or third party owned. Okay. Now these first three methods, those all are directly benefiting the occupant of that property. The power is flowing into the home and they're getting the benefit. There is a fourth method, and that is when the utility or a third party utility owns the solar on someone's home. Now, this is not super common. This is a little more rare, but there are companies or like utilities that will install the system, and the solar will bypass the home's electrical, backfeed into the utility, and provide utility power that home is probably just buying, but they're then getting usually some kind of a discount. In those scenarios, the utility company is responsible for the equipment, the repairs on the equipment, and any damage caused to the home in that. So these are the four methods of ownership, and really, like, again, for equipment purposes, for inspection purposes, how those are impacted. Now, again, for agents and that kind of and other audiences, these, and I tried to lace a little bit into that, how it's relevant to them, but those are the four primary methods of ownership when we're looking at this. Okay, so that's that. So that's kind of the dry, boring bullet point stuff. Let's get into how it works, and let's look at the equipment, and let's look at how it goes wrong. So thanks for bearing with me as we go through real wordy stuff. Okay, next up, let's talk about the actual panels themselves, the technology. When we're talking about solar for the rest of this conversation, we're going to be talking about photovoltaic electricity or photovoltaic solar panels that are generating electricity, power. Photovoltaic, voltaic is power, photo is light. So power that's generated from light. So these are solar panels that generate electricity from sunlight, rather than, not to be confused with thermal solar, which would be solar that impacts, cooling or heating or water, maybe pools, water heaters. There's different types of thermal solar out there, but that's only radiant energy that's heating that. This is all about electricity-driven solar panels, okay? So that's what we're talking about for this conversation. Now, how it works. So let's talk about the flow of kind of energy and how it's generated and how it flows through the home, because I think this is important. People will ask you questions about this if you are going to be inspecting these. Okay. The way that solar works is you have sunlight, and in that light, when we go down to like the most basic level, there are protons in the light. Those protons, they strike the solar panel, and in that panel, you've got these silicon wafers, and these have free electrons. So we're talking about at the most minute scale here, that those electrons, when the protons hit them, that creates movement. That movement creates energy, okay? So this electricity that's coming off of the roof, it's generated in DC power. So light striking the solar panels, they're collectors, if you will. Think of them more like a window than anything. If you think about a solar panel as a window, it starts to, I think, click better. But a solar panel is probably closer to a window than almost any other technology out there. But it's collecting the light and that light then, again, creates DC power. That DC power comes off the solar panel and then goes into an inverter. That inverter changes it from DC power into AC power. And I'm sure, as inspectors, you guys know that, what the difference between those two are. but that AC power now, or AC electricity, is now ready to then enter the home, because that's obviously the way we power homes. But solar in its natural form is DC, and pretty much any electricity in its natural form is DC. Everything is generated or stored all in DC power. That's why we have to have inverters, or the little bricks that we plug into the wall for our cell phones. Those all change the power between DC and AC. So we've got this AC inverter. This inverter will then sends the electricity through the main electrical system of the home, as long as it's one of those, first three, ownership methods, and that powers the needs of the home first. So it'll backfeed into the home through a breaker or through a line side tap, and that will then power the appliances or the electrical needs. And think of power as like a vacuum. It goes to wherever the path of least resistance is. So it goes into the home first. When the home is sated and it's good to go, it will then power, or it'll then go back through the meter, spin that meter backwards. Now, we don't have a little disc that spins like we used to, but they're all digital meters now, but it's counting backwards, and this is net metering. So when that meter is spinning backwards, it's going back to the grid or the utility company. They're net metering. So they're sending power back to them. And then when the solar is not enough power for the home, then the meter stops spinning backwards and starts spinning forwards. And then they'll use the credits that they had built up from the excess solar time or daytime, and then start powering the home from the grid. And so that exchange of power is net metering. Now, that's basically how it works. Now, solar, the way that, again, if we were powering 100% of a home with solar, 8 to 10 hours worth of power will be 24 hours worth of electricity will be generated in an 8 to 10 hour window. Now, with that window, we've got, the ability to, store that with them. If not, and you've got a battery on the home, let's talk about that. That battery, if it has the ability to isolate from the grid, or depending on what the software programming is on the battery, the power will flow into the home, and then the excess, instead of going to the grid first, would then go to power an empty battery. Once that battery is full, it'll then store it for when the home then needs power, and then it's feeding into the system to then give the home what it needs in terms of power until the battery's dead, and then it will then retract or go back to the grid. And so that's how these work. In order for that to work, where the home then operates solely, like if you were to eliminate the grid, and you can do that with some sort of a transfer switch, or an energy hub. There's several different devices out there available commercially for this. Tesla's got them, Franklin's got them, Enphase has got them. There's lots of them out there that are commercially available, and some of the you can do this also if the home has a generator, it's got a transfer switch. But essentially what happens is the home can be powered just off the solar and the batteries if it's an island, because the other thing is that if there's no grid power, there's no solar power. Okay, the way that this software works in these inverters is that the home only will turn on the solar panels, or the inverter will only turn on if it senses grid power or battery power, because they do not want the grid energized if there is no grid power on. So that would create an unsafe environment. And so that's where we want to avoid doing that. And so what they do is they put those transfer switches in place for that, because you don't want to backfeed and energize a grid that's supposed to be down, that becomes an unsafe environment for those that might be working on the grid. And so that's where we've created, or there are these rules around that, and the software that prevents that. So that's where solar, if you don't have batteries and this grid goes down, now there's a couple exceptions to this. Now, Utah just passed a law where you can actually do this without having to have a battery. You can start to isolate some of your power. So we're starting to see some exceptions to this. But by and large, across the board, the rule has always been, because that's like a brand new thing in one state, like very isolated. But almost always no grid power and no batteries, no solar power. So that's just one of those things that's important to understand. So anyway, that is how energy flows from the solar into the home through the grid. Now, if it is a utility-owned solar, it bypasses the main panel and then goes back directly to the grid.
Hey,
AJ,
Corey,
got a question?
Yeah, we got a couple questions.
Perfect.
One going back to the agreement. Are roofs uncovered in that? Roof leaks, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's really, that workmanship warranty is largely going to be impacted by um, roof leaks. That's really where the main point is, or the main exercise of that warranty, that workmanship warranty is for roof leaks.
Okay. And is this information relevant in Canada?
Yep. Yep. I was just in Toronto this weekend giving this exact same training.
Okay. All
Yep.
right. And let's see. And does the battery and the public electric grid feed the home at the same time?
Um, it can. So it just depends on the software of the battery. Like all things, these things are dictated by software. Um, so it'll have a some sort of a control unit. Typically now that's mostly done like on a mobile device, like a cell phone, where they can control that and set the parameters and say, okay, during certain times of the day, I want the grid to power my battery because maybe in some areas you got free power at night or something, whatever. Like there may be different scenarios where the grid might power the battery or the battery would power the home and the solar might power the home. But the idea usually for most batteries now is that they're powering the home in place of the grid. But usually, then this is why more you won't see these as common outside of like states like California and Hawaii and maybe some of the other like big solar states is because the cost of electricity can be prohibitive for adding batteries in, but in certain states it's cheaper or really similar to the cost of adding batteries and solar than being with the grid.
And just a clarification on one of the questions, are the contracts the same in Canada?
Yeah, they'll have very, very similar contracts. The ownership methods are the same. In fact, there are more of those utility owned systems out there in Canada. But yeah, they're very, very similar. The transfer, pretty much all of those are very similar. The difference is in Canada, you've got a an attorney that usually handles escrow, where here you've got a title company that will usually handle escrow. So that's usually where the big difference lies in this, and then who's collecting that and who's kind of the quarterback for the transfer process. But outside of that, the agreements are fairly universal between the two industries. And again, whether there's like 3 or 4 agreements, that's pretty much all standard.
Cool. That's all the questions for now.
Cool, great. Glad to have some questions coming in. All right. Okay, so hopefully this is making sense. You guys are following and talking about like what way that these work. Now let's talk about the actual equipment and let's look at the equipment and see, what it is and how long it lasts. All right, so for solar, there are 4 different parts to the system that we can kind of group the equipment together in, and then we'll go through each of these and talk about, again, what they are and how long they last. So the racking equipment has 3 different parts to the racking. Okay, so with racking is what holds it down. The panels are what collect it. The inverters are what change it from DC to AC, and then batteries obviously are what store it, like we just talked about in the last slide. So in a racking system, the racking system is dictated because there's a lot of questions that come up with this, especially for inspectors. So I'm just going to pre-answer some of your questions on this. The thing about solar that makes it unique is that most solar systems, and not all, but almost all solar systems that are grid tied require some sort of a permitting, because where you can sneak a deck on your home without this maybe municipality or city or township knowing, or Providence or whatever, a solar system is very difficult because it's tied into the home's electrical and therefore the utility. And so a utility will know, and they require really strict permitting. And so almost every system out there, and I can't say every because I'm sure someone's done it without, as a DIY project without approval, but they'll probably get busted by the utility because they're backfeeding, without permission. You have to get a permission to operate in order to be your own production unit within a utility. And so most utilities require that, if not all, but not every municipality or jurisdiction or AHJ does require. Actually, the town where I live in Gilbert, Arizona, does not require solar permits. Now they do require a permit if it has a battery, but solar only, they feel free. But our local utility, SRP or Salt River Project, it does require it. So pretty much all of these are installed to this standard. And the reason I bring that up right here is because the racking equipment is a really important structural component to the system, because this is what holds it on. This is what creates stability. This is how it anchors into the home. And this is done based off of engineering specs. And so this is not something that's just like thrown together or guessed. And certainly the closer to today that it was installed, the more control there was around it. But even early on, in when solar was really getting going in the U.S. in 2010, there was still requirements for permitting on these. And so these are all engineered. They're all based on engineering specs. You've got attachments that tie into usually, not always, but usually the structural members of the roof, the rafters, the beams, whatever it is that's holding up the roof, the engineered trusses, whatever is holding up that roof, those typically have this right here is a 3 to 5 inch lag bolt that's then anchored into that structural member. And the reason that it gets important, we'll talk about that, when we get into the problems that show up, is when they miss that, then it can create opportunities for leaks. And then also it diminishes the structural strength of the system. But usually the engineer, if you notice here, there are, like, you can see the structural points. The engineer will determine based off of the rating of the rail, the local wind uplift. I mean, all these different parameters to then determine, how often do they want them, every 4 feet, every 2 feet, every 6 feet, how often they want those anchor points. But the clamps that hold down these panels, when these are missing, that presents one of the most dangerous and highest liability issues for homeowners. So the clamps are really important. The attachments are important for strength and for waterproofing, and the rails are what hold the panels up. And so this is the bones, if you will, of the system that's holding it to the roof. Or if it's a ground mount system, it would be, a ground mount equipment. But that again is usually an engineered product. I've never installed a solar system that didn't have that, but almost all solar systems are built to that a very specific specification. Now, depending on where you're at, there are different types of roof penetrations. If you've got tile roofs, all of these are legal. This one's a good example of, I would call that out. That should have been sealed right there. But whether it's a tile hook or a tile replacement or a tile pass-through, all are legal, all are fine as long as they're done correctly. But I like to show that one because it's not. That should have been sealed there. But it basically, if it's an asphalt shingle roof, there's either a flashed or a non-flashed. These new non-flashed ones are showing up. But a lot of times what happens on these is they might pre-drill for that rafter, and you might find problems on the roof if they've missed those rafters and then, not done a flashing on there. So that's, again, some ways that can go wrong. And I'll show some examples of that. But this is a metal roof. A lot of times these are not tied into the structural member, but they'll be tied into the actual roofing material. But more anchor points. So it's not just a single anchor point. They'll have more anchor points. And then there's, your flat roofs. And oftentimes those are not penetrating. They will be, adhesive, whether it's an EPDM roof or there's a few different methods for that. So it's not to say there's one method here. There are many different. There are even, and I'm sure many of you have seen if you're inspecting commercial, where you've got ballasted systems where there are concrete blocks. So I don't have that one method on here. I've got most of the primary methods that we see for the roof attachments, but those ballasted systems being held down by concrete blocks, the objective is to not create penetration points. But again, typically are far more often found in commercial application rather than residential. So this is more of a discussion about residential, small commercial. This is relevant for that as well. But if we're talking large, industrial scale or utility scale solar, then, that's kind of outside of the parameter of what we're talking about in this discussion. Okay, so that's the racking equipment that holds the panels down. The panels themselves, again, think of this as your light collectors. These are your windows, if you will. And actually, again, these are closer to a window in technology than a lot of times people compare it to a laptop or a cell phone, and they're like, oh, these things are changing all the time. They're getting better all the time. And the reality is they're really not. There hasn't been a whole ton of changes to solar panels. Now, there's been other changes made to the tech, but these are pretty simple pieces of tech. It's essentially glass that covers silicon wafers, and you've got aluminum that encapsulates it. And then you got a couple of MC4 cables, or these are standard connection points out of the back of the panels that every single solar panel out there has. That's all there are to these panels. And this is really the weak point in the panel. but you can always tell the glass if it's broken or not because it's tempered, and tempered glass always spider webs. It always, completely shatters when it does break. And so it's very obvious when it does break. So anyways, it's very, very simple in terms of technology. A lot of times people ask what's better, one panel manufacturer versus another. The reality is most panels, it's almost impossible to just distinguish one manufacturer to the next a year after it gets installed. But they're very, very built very similar. And anyways, the technology has been pretty simple. In fact, this shows kind of some of the panel's advancements over the years. The key advancement they figured out is just how to make them better in terms of getting more silicon per square foot on a panel. And so in 1981, when they first commercially hit the market, this was, what they look like. They were round silicon wafers, and then, come, early 2000s and then into 2010, that's again where you'll see a lot more of these systems really start showing up is in 2010. This is what they look like, 250 watts. So this is about 100 watts. And again, this is just directly rated to the number of, or the amount of, possible energy generation for this panel. So this 250 watt panel is similar to this one, but just built a little better. This used to be a round ingot. Now they're using a square ingot for, the way they slice their silicon, and then have now placed it on the panel. The 400 watt panel from about 2010 to 2020 in that neighborhood went from about 250 watts to about 310, 320. And then all of a sudden we saw all the panels like jump up to 400 watts, because if you notice the width difference between this panel and this panel, they just started making them bigger. That's really what it came down to, was the footprint of the panel they started making bigger. Today we're seeing panels that are 410 to 420. Like they've kind of like, there's only a certain point that installers can handle these, and that's kind of the max size. So there could be some other, advancements coming down later down the years, but from what we've seen, these solar panels have not changed much over time. And what's interesting is they haven't degraded much either. So let me tell you a little bit about the actual like specs on these. Now the life on these, and this may shock some of you, but they're much longer than what we see, and I'll show you some evidence to that. But rather than a 15 or 20 or 25 year life that a lot of them are estimated for, we are finding that panels are lasting far longer than that, and most of the estimations are these will last 50 years, maybe longer in many instances. And the reason for that is the way that these are manufactured and warranted is they'll have a warranty on them that says they cannot reduce in the productive output per year any more than 0.5%. In English, that means it cannot reduce any more than 0.5% like of energy output per year for 25 years. So after 25 years, they can't be producing any less than like 85%, of the expected energy output. What we're finding though, the reality is we're looking at panels and systems that are, 20, 25 years, 30 years. These panels are doing way better than that. In fact, we frequently inspect systems that are 20 years old and that have zero degradation. They're still producing 100% of what they produced on day one. And so the productive output of the panels are quite good. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no like replacement needed on these equipment, but the panels themselves are usually outperform what most people would expect them to do. And so they're most likely going to be around much longer. And then the Iraqi equipment never wears out. It's just equipment. It just sits there. And many of you may be asking about roof replacements and that kind of thing. I'm sure that'll come up, and I'll explain that here in a minute. But the panels themselves are typically going to last much longer than more people realize. But the units per install, if it has less than 4 panels on it, it's probably like water solar. It's probably thermal solar. So 4 to 100 panels is pretty standard for residential. I think the average right now is like 21 or 22 panels per roof. That's going to be your standard size. That's like a 8 or 9 kilowatt solar system. I think 8 is the average US install size right now for solar panels. But yeah, they typically are up on the roof. Sometimes they're on ground mounts, but almost always the roof. And that, again, most of the reason for the roof is just the cost of install. 30% of the cost of a ground mount solar system is just the mount itself. If you got to build a whole new structure to hold your panels, it's more expensive. And again, if we've learned one thing about solar panels, the cost to put them on is usually one of the biggest factors in whether people do it or not. So that's why you see way more roof mount than ground mount. Replacement cost per panel. Retail right now, you can get 400 watt panels for somewhere between $250, $300, maybe a couple $100 in labor, maybe double that in labor. But, that's where we're seeing about a replacement cost of about $500 per panel. You can swap out a 250-watt panel or a 300-watt panel for a 400-watt panel because it's extremely difficult to find a 250-watt panel anymore. You just swap it for a 400. And, if it's in the center of the array, usually it's just moved to the outside. So it's one of those things. These are very modular, and it takes 10, 15 minutes to swap a panel. It doesn't take a whole lot. It's, an impact driver, releasing the four, panel clips. And then, you lift the panel, you unplug the two MC connectors, you put the other ones in, you secure the wires, you re-secure them. It's a pretty simple process if that's the only thing that you're doing. So that's a little bit about swapping them out. Okay. So that's the panels themselves. And we're going to talk about the whole system in terms of like longevity and stuff here in a minute. But let's talk next about the next critical component, which are inverters. There are two primary kinds of inverters, technically three, but most of the time it's going to be two inverters. There's string inverters and microinverters. The third kind is a hybrid when a battery is involved. For example, the Tesla Powerwall 3 has got a hybrid inverter into it. And what that means is it changes both the battery and the solar. And so it doesn't need its own independent inverter. But again, 99% of systems out there have got either a string or a microinverter on them. And the split between the market is actually pretty even on these string versus micro. String inverters, just kind of covering those quickly, those last on average about 10 years. It's usually, 1 to 3 per install, but usually just one. But if they do kind of have sizing issues, they would have added multiple inverters for a single install. They're usually located on the side of the garage, or side of the home, or in a garage or utility room. The thing that kills these and why they only last for about 10 years is because of heat. Heat is what kills most electronics. It's electronics don't love heat, but they oftentimes sit in the heat and they oftentimes generate heat. And so that's one of the biggest things that kills these. And so as a single failure point for the whole system, these definitely should be replaced. And this is the number one failure point for solar. When inverters go down, the way to think about inverters is like tires. If you have a car and your tires wear out and you're driving a new Suburban or something, or you're driving a new Toyota Camry and your tires run out after 25,000 miles, most of us are probably not driving our car into the dump and leaving the car and going to get another car. We just drive down to the local tire store and we swap the tires. Tires and inverters are similar in this analogy. The inverters, when they wear out, it's just a matter of swapping those out. And so you've got a system that, and this is where I want to explain the difference between hard costs and soft costs. When we look at the cost to install a solar system, you've got these two categories of cost. Hard costs are your actual equipment to get the solar on the roof. These components we're talking about, and then another component or another part called BOS, or balance of system, that makes up your hard cost of your equipment. That's somewhere between 40 and 50% of the cost of the install. The other half are your soft costs: labor, permitting, design, engineering, application fees, sales commissions, all these other costs that are associated with getting it up on the roof. And so when it comes to just having an issue like this, if you got a $25,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 system and it takes $2,500 to swap that out and it gives you another $30,000 of savings for the next 10 years, it's kind of a no-brainer to just swap that one component out. But a lot of times, again, if it fails when it's under warranty, like if this Solar Edge right here were to fail at year 3, it's under warranty for 10 years. So it's a matter of contacting Solar Edge. And then if the installer's out of business, finding the local one that does. Oftentimes they can refer one. You can contact Sprk. We can also help with that. But those can be swapped out without any major cost of equipment. Just usually, again, might come down to a portion or all of the labor costs, depending on, what Solar Edge or the other manufacturers are compensating for on that side. So that's again, why we bring this up is because this is a fundamental understanding that a lot of people don't understand about solar, is that it can be usually fixed or repaired without too many issues. Or oftentimes you may find that a system does not work and it simply needs a software update. And it hasn't had a software update because somebody changed their Wi-Fi 2 years ago. And since then, there was an update that had some glitch and now it's not producing power and just needs an update. And that's just installer visit out to this house to get it reconnected, get it updated, and now it's off and running. So just again, a little bit about these unit cost. $1,500 to $5,000 per unit. That would obviously depend on what the rating is. If it's a 2,000 watt inverter versus a 11,000 watt inverter, that's obviously going to increase your cost. So that's a little bit about those string inverters. Okay, microinverters. Instead of one inverter for the whole system, you've got an inverter per panel. And where there are many different manufacturers of string inverters, there's only just a couple for microinverters. And it's not super common. There's about three major ones, and Enphase really dominates the market, if I'm being honest. And I've got friends that work at the others. You got Tigo, and you've got, there's a couple other AP systems. But Enphase, they have probably 90% of the microinverter market. So these are quite common. These go on the underside of each panel, but these have a warranty for 25 years. And the reason these things, they do last significantly longer. And the reason they last so much longer and they've got a longer warranty is because they're much simpler, or they're much smaller. They're under the panels and they're carrying the load of a single panel instead of the whole solar system. And they're packed with this heat shedding material that just gives them a longer life. And so when they do get replaced, it's again a matter of contacting the manufacturer, and they'll warranty that if there is an issue with it. I'll give you kind of a hint. This is kind of like a little pro tip here for those that are like thermal drone flyers. If you're not sure about and have monitoring, you got a microinverter system that's not fully functional, and you fly your drone over it, or you can scan them, the thermal on those. The panels that are not operational will be the warmer ones because they don't have that energy release from sending those electrons down the road. And so they get warmer. So your warmer panels, that's how you identify which ones have gone out and which ones haven't, in terms of if it's a microinverter system or a string. But usually that microinverter system will, you'll be able to identify those, because oftentimes you can just go out, swap out that one inverter, and the rest are off to the races. But again, this doesn't have a single point of failure. So, and they last quite a bit longer, but they are more challenging to swap out. I've swapped out a few of these systems, and it's more work. It's usually a full day of work instead of just, a couple hours swapping an inverter. So it just, a little more labor, but it's every 25 years, swapping out all of them rather than, every 10. So there are pros and cons to both of these systems. But that's again, how the two of those work. All right, now moving on to batteries. That's the last component here that we'll talk about. There are three different parts to most battery systems, not every, but most. Most will have some sort of a backup load panel, which now with whole home battery backup, that may just be the main electrical panel. But oftentimes there is a load panel that's dedicated to the backup loads. So, whether that's whole home or dedicated, you can usually see in that load panel what is being backed up. Then you've got your energy hub or your transfer switch. This is what allows the house to island, and for the house to be essentially, powered off of the solar and batteries alone. This is Tesla's battery hub. There are other manufacturers out there, but most of these, the way that it works is this little guy in here is your transfer switch. This is the utility lines that come in here. So from the meter, this acts as the transfer switch over here. This is where you've got the loads for the, your electrical panel. You can actually have four different, your loads for your electrical panel come in here and tie in here. And you can see there's a lot of tie-in points, but you can tie in 5 different power sources into these. You can do solar, batteries, a generator. You can also do obviously the grid, and then a 2-way backfeed EV. So for example, like the Ford Lightning, that will, you can power your truck with your house, and your truck can power your car, or your truck can power your house. Now that is possible when you have, a transfer switch or a load center like this that can handle that backfeed. So that's how that actually works in those emergency situations. So anyways, that's probably, again, not super common out there, but it's good to know, again, just a little bit of information about this, because again, we're definitely starting to see these pop up more. And if it's in a non-heavy solar market, it'll be on obviously your more high end or perhaps prepper more, minded individuals. But if it is in a more of a solar centric market, we'll see them there. So batteries, that's obviously the last component, are the actual batteries. Most batteries now commercially available are lithium based batteries. And so, these are the Tesla. And again, there's Franklin, there's Enphase, there's LG's got batteries. There's a few different manufacturers out there that are your mass manufacturers of batteries. That's going to be your major components in terms of your battery storage system. Now, lithium-based batteries, they usually will get about 4,000-ish cycles out of a lithium-based battery. And that's just because it's a chemical process, and that chemical process starts to break down the battery itself. So they usually last 10 to 12 to 15 years. Most manufacturers warranty within that time period to where they really start degrading. Most batteries installs have got 1 to 5 batteries on them. The most common is definitely just one of these 10 to 13 kilowatt hour batteries. But there are, other manufacturers out there where you can stack the battery. So you might see a 2 kilowatt hour battery up to a, 50 kilowatt hour battery. On my own home, I had, about 40 kilowatts of battery on my own home, trying to see if I could be a fully energy independent home. But energy loads were just too heavy in the Arizona heat with, running the AC, 25 hours a day. So anyways, I'm not bitter about that at all. Anyway, so the amount of power that the batteries, there's 2 ways to rate these batteries. One is based off of the amount of power that it discharges. So if you look at this bottle here, your kilowatt hours is like how much capacity it has. And then the watt hours or the watts of the battery would be the mouth of the battery, how much it can discharge simultaneously. And most of the newer batteries have a larger watt, because that if you don't have enough watts that it can push simultaneously, you don't have enough energy to start up things like an air conditioner. So your heavy load, like air conditioners or other, heavy energy requirement startup devices, you can't really do whole home backup, but most of the newer ones do come with that. So that's been some of the innovation that happened with batteries, but usually these are on the side of the home. This replacement cost of $1,500 to $10,000. $10,000 is going to be like to replace a 13 kilowatt hour power wall. But your lower cost, those $1,500 are going to be those 2 kilowatt hour batteries. So that's usually what they're rated, is by the kilowatt hour. And that's usually where you're going to look at replacement costs after those time frames. And again, if it's cycling at that. So if it doesn't cycle every day, if maybe somebody's only cycling it a couple times a week, that could go 20 years. So it's usually not just based off of a time, but that warranty usually is. So that's a little bit about the batteries. Okay, so let's just look at a little bit of the ground equipment, because when we're inspecting solar, what we found is that there are more important things oftentimes on the ground we need to look at, because a lot of times the issues happen on the ground, even more so than the roof. So I want to just go through and identify a few of these like things that differentiate the different types of systems. So each one of these photos is going to get progressively more complicated. So if you've never seen a setup like this is a solar home. This is the conduit coming from the roof. This is DC energy coming off the roof. If it had micro inverters on there, this would be coming down in AC, but still it's labeled here because they do not want you to tie into this power. They don't want you to open up this LB, tie into that power, and then, have loads not behind an overcurrent protection device or a breaker. And so that's really important for understanding that. And then this is your inverter, right? If you follow our conduit here, this goes into a revenue meter, or this is a lease system. You notice there's a little tiny sticker there that says Sunrun on it. But that's your lease meter. Sometimes they have them, sometimes they don't. In Arizona and a couple other states, the utility requires solar to have its own dedicated meter. In many states, they don't. And so you'll only see one meter on a system, but that's what that meter is. This is an AC disconnect, or a fireman disconnect. The reason why solar's got all these labels on it, and this here is a fireman needs to be able to walk up to a system, identify what it is, and shut it off quickly. And then the solar will tie into the home's electrical in the electrical panel much of the time, either through a backfeed breaker on the bus bar, or on the feeder lines to that bus bar, a line side tap. So those are the typical methods for that. So that's, again, a little bit about some ground equipment. So that's a single solar system. Okay. But we see sometimes someone goes solar and doesn't just do it once, but adds more solar after the fact. So this is an example of when you got a system. This was a system. This is installed in California. They went solar in 2012, sold the house. Somebody else moved in. They thought they needed more solar, so they added more. And, when on the agent side, now they got 4 or 8, not 4, but now 8 contracts tied to this house. So anyways, all the more joy. But that's kind of where now looking at this, there are two different distinct systems. And the reason we know that is there are two different sets of conduit coming off the roof. And usually going to have two different, a little bit different looking panels on the roof, but you can usually tell the number of systems, not by your inverter count, but the conduit coming off. So two different installs, both string inverters. They're tied, they combined here in this little combiner panel, the backfeed breakers here, but instead of them tying into the main panel, whoops, we got a meter collar that is a form of a line side tap where it ties into the home's electrical, but behind the meter. And so they pull the meter. And the reason they do this is that the amount of solar you tie into electrical panel is that you can is a math equation. And if you got too much solar, then what that panel can handle, now you either upgrade from a 200 amp or from 100 amp to a 200 or from 200 to 400, or you derate the main breaker so that way there's not as many loads on the panel and now you can put more solar through it. So there's like major changes that have to happen to the panel. And so now there's a few other creative ways to tie solar systems into a home. So again, just trying to give you guys some examples of what we're looking at here. Again, a couple different AC disconnects. But if I was like looking at this home, or if like a firefighter was trying to get up here, they would want to make sure that they are switching off this AC disconnect here. But if I was like looking at this for my intents and purposes, I'm going to probably be making sure that I do look at two different systems here, not just the one. So anyways, the last system is the most complicated. This has got not one, but two solar systems with batteries, and one of them is string inverter and one is a microinverter system. So the way that these microinverter systems work is, like I said, there's panels up on the roof, but then usually they come down and they'll combine, and this would be AC power coming down to this in a combiner panel inside of this electrical panel here, that's got the strings that combined here. There's usually a like a little communication box for monitoring purposes, but that's the microinverter system. And so this has got a string and a microinverter system. They're both tying into, well, it was tied into this, but now all the loads been moved into this primary backup panel. And this is all tying into a Tesla gateway or your energy hub, and the batteries, the solar, and the utility are all tied into this one system here. And so that way the home can function on or off grid. And so, the house can stay up while the power's down, or they don't have to store power. So one of the use cases for this, like in California or Hawaii, net metering, like I was telling you about, actually is starting to go away for certain people. And so the utility will only issue so many net metering contracts to people, or where at like, if they're giving you one credit for one credit, maybe they go down to, 80% of that, and then 50% and 20%. And so California is one of those states like Hawaii where there's a lot of solar there. And so the utilities are giving less favorable net metering. Those are the instances why many homeowners are opting into batteries. Outside of that, we don't see a ton of it, but again, just kind of helping you understand the use cases for why people are doing this and the components that we're looking at for it. Okay, so those are the systems. So I want to just now go through, and after this, we're going to take a quick little break for any questions, and then we're going to move on to like how these run into some problems. But this is a good case study for longevity. And with this longevity study, it's really good because this system, it's a 100 kilowatt solar system that was installed in 1981. Again, one of the first systems that went up in the US in Beverly, Massachusetts, and at Beverly High School. And what's interesting about this is this system, so it's 93% of the original system when they did this case study in 2021. And this is what they found, that for the productive output of the system with a new inverter, so that's the caveat here. It wasn't just like the original inverter. The original inverter went out and they've got a new inverter installed on this system. And it was actually the inverter company who did the case study and presented this to a CE class that I was at for solar installers, where they went through and showed that the system from day one, and then 40 years later when they did this, instead of it being at what it was expected at 78% of the production, it was up at 92%. So even our earliest installs were way outperforming what anyone expected. And so instead of it decreasing at 0.5% per year, it was only going down at 0.2%. So we're seeing better long-term production on these systems, again, than what people anticipated. And so what we're seeing from these is that they're going to be around for a while. And the real biggest obstacle for most people is just a re-roof. And so the process for swapping those out with the re-roof is simply calling a solar installer, having them remove it and put it back on. Some roof installers will do this. I would definitely have it inspected. That's a key time for inspectors to go in and inspect it after that. But when it's uninstalled and reinstalled, that's like usually a few hours to take it off, maybe a day to, or a few hours to put it back on, depending on the size of the system. But that really then helps the system perpetuate for decades. So that's how kind of, again, answers one of the key questions that come up with longevity and how these work, and kind of like I said, where the future of these are going in terms of how long they're going to last. So basically, I want to, just like I said, we'll pause there for a second, see if anybody has questions about equipment, longevity, or anything else.
All right, Crystal, whenever you're ready to speak, go ahead and ask your question.
Hey guys, can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So I have a question for you. I spoke with an insurance broker here in Canada recently, and they informed me that on residential installs, there's starting to be a concern for current installs for solar panels over 15 kilowatt or 100 15 kilowatts, sorry. And I'm curious if there is what are the requirements for a 15 kilowatts? Is there a specific requirement, based off of a square footage of a home, what would be considered an appropriate amount of kilowatts installed? So when we're looking at the amount of panels or the square footage of the home, what would be considered like a reasonable install or maybe
Yeah.
not enough solar power
Sure.
to install, if that makes sense?
Did you remember why they had stated that? Was it due to weight load or just electrical? Did they give any kind of parameters around that, or was it just
No, I think
okay,
it's
that's
just
okay.
because
I can guess why, but anyways, no, I think it's an excellent question. There are certain municipalities or jurisdictions where they'll limit the percentage of the roof. So they'll only let you install solar up to 80% or 70% of the total roof footprint, which if you got a small townhome or something, that can happen, without too much difficulty. So there are definitely precedents for that where they limit the amount of square footage available to install on a roof. But 15 kilowatts, and if we're talking about our average 25, well, not average, but have a 2,500 square foot home, using, 15 to 18,000 kilowatt hours a year, that's going to be, satisfied with a 9 to 10 kilowatt solar system, depending on whether it's on, the south or the east or west, and depending on which, location that it's at. So a 15 kilowatt solar system is quite large. That would be kind of almost double what we would see. Now, I was in Arizona. We were a high user. I had a 17 kilowatt solar system on my home, which is abnormally large. And again, 40 kilowatts of battery. So to exceed 15 kilowatts is probably going to be the exception rather than the rule. But it probably has to do with weight parameters. But even the weight on these, I think insurance really is another industry that needs some help with education on these. But the weight of these is about the equivalent of an additional layer of shingles. So it's about 2.5 pounds per square foot is what the actual weight load is for most roofs. But that could be what they're looking at. But yeah, 15 kilowatt solar system is on the high side. But that is not that uncommon of a restriction. There'll be sometimes restrictions. Most utilities restrict you to 110% of your usage. So if you've got, you're only using 10,000 kilowatt hours, you can't put on more than 11 kilowatt solar system onto your home because they don't want you like net metering too much because they don't really want to pay you out. They'll give you credits for it, but they're not looking for you to make money off of them for giving you retail rates for electricity.
So with that being said, are the descriptions of how many kilowatts are they labeled when we walk up to the panels so we can understand if it's more than 15 kilowatts on an install?
Um, Not typically. It can be. That's something usually that's calculated. That's something that Sprk does help inspectors with when we do inspections with an inspector. So that's part of the software of what we're calculating, with them and for them. But a way to, that's basically when you're trying to figure out system size. I'll just tell you the cheat code for it. You find the wattage of the individual panel. So if you have a 400 watt panel, and then you just take your panel count. And so if you've got 10 400 watt panels, you've got a 4,000 watt system or a 4 kilowatt solar system.
Okay, and I've got one more quick question. I hope that's
Please,
okay.
yeah. No, it's great. I love it. You got good questions.
In regards to the installation of the solar panels, so they're obviously going to be generating some sort of energy, and energy could be produced in any form, considering heat being one of these distributions. What is the typical heat distribution that's coming off of the panels? Because certain roofing materials like shingles and stuff like that have very specific ratings for heat requirements or acceptance. So, what is our typical solar panels generating in between the roof sheathing or the roofing material and the panel? How hot does it typically get?
Oh, that's a really good question. I actually don't know the exact number on it. I don't want to misspeak here. But I can tell you maybe another way to answer this question, but I don't have the exact data on that. It is a good question, but the reason that solar panel does sit up off the roof is solar likes to perform, it performs better when it's cooler. And so, like for example, integrated solar or BIPV, when it's solar is integrated, like the Tesla power roof, solar roof, those perform not as well because they're integrated, about 30% less in their productive output because they're integrated and they're not vented. So, or they're not up off the roof. That venting gives those the chance to cool, but the heat factor under them is probably significantly lower than what's actually being impacted by the rest of the roof. We see the roofing material under solar is usually in much better condition after a decade or two than the rest of the roof because it's absorbing all the radiant light that would be striking the roof otherwise.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, good questions. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Crystal. All right, we have a couple more questions. We have one from Hussein who asks, can the software tell you the output level of individual panels?
With a microinverter solar system, if you have monitoring, for example, like an Enphase system, and you have monitoring on your phone, that monitoring can certainly facilitate that like module level production. And that's what we're like what Sprk does when we help an inspector and do an inspection is we help measure the production output. But for an individual homeowner in their own monitoring, they're able to see that module level production. But outside of that, it's going to be an accumulation. If we're measuring the productive output of the system, we want to see what the total productive output is. And that's going to be, but that's called module level monitoring, and that's very common with microinverters.
All right, and then one more question from Justin. He asked, where'd it go? Do the solar panels protect the roof?
Yeah, and I mean, it depends on how well they were installed. So the racking material certainly can hurt the roof if it wasn't installed correctly. But as long as it was installed to specifications, it's like, so I live in Arizona, and in Arizona, if you leave a plastic bucket out in the sun all summer long, and you go to pick up that bucket at the end of the year, that bucket can just crumble under your hands. It's just same thing with a plastic toy, whatever. That sun just eats up the radiant light. But you put that same bucket in the shade all summer long, and you go to pick it up, and it will be flexible and strong and the same, exposed to the same heat levels, maybe a little less, but essentially the same amount of heat, just didn't get that radiant light. Oftentimes, especially when you see a roof breaking down, like when it's shining, like with a asphalt shingle roof, they start to degrade because they're dried out. And so since they're not absorbing all that light, again, that's why the roof under them typically is in better shape than outside of it. Barring that you don't have animals roosting under there and that kind of thing. So, short of that, the solar actually helps to protect the roof that it sits under and actually gives better longevity to the roof underneath it as long as it was installed correctly. Good question.
Awesome. I think Crystal had one more thing to add on there.
Okay.
It can show us on our phones, but that's for homeowners only. There isn't the software for home? Oh, sorry, I got a question popped in. There isn't software for us to use as inspectors, right?
Oh, there wasn't until Sprk came along. So yeah, at the end of this, we're going to go over that on how inspectors can inspect solar, and we'll show you that like with Sprk. So what we're trying to do is give you guys the resources to be able to understand it, inspect it if you want on your own. But hopefully, we want to give you the ability to do so quickly and efficiently. We have software for that. We help you guys to conduct solar inspections. So that's kind of we want to try and keep this as agnostic as possible and trying to give you guys good, unbiased information. But I'm definitely biased in the sense of we built Sprk to answer this question and help with that. So our software does help measure the productive output of the system, and I'll show you how we do that and how that works. But yeah, that's a very good question. That the only software that I'm aware of that does that out there today is Sprk for inspectors.
And I think there might be one more question.
Sure.
Again, feel for it real quick. So if you need to get a drink of water before we start the second hour.
Oh no, I'm good to go. I mean, I could talk about this for hours. That's my problem. I like this stuff too much. Yeah, I think I'm okay to keep going. If we want to just keep powering through, I know definitely want to honor everybody's time.
Yep, go ahead and power through, and we'll circle back to the question.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, so getting into, how these things do have problems, because while solar can be really great from a long-term perspective, we do see some challenges that do come up. And so what I want to do is give you guys 10 problems. Like what we've done is after, we've helped a lot of inspectors around the country over the last few years inspect solar and look at them. And I've installed over 10,000 systems, and I've done a lot of maintenance on them and been involved a lot from a construction standpoint in keeping the systems up. And so these are the common problems and the way that we've classified them in these 10 different categories, but how they show up most commonly that you can observe as an inspector. So what we're going to do is give you the problem, like what goes wrong, how it's correct, and then a comment to be able to help you to better understand not just how to tell someone there's a problem, but offer some sort of a solution and who can then help provide that solution. So, so let's jump into the 10 problems and how they show up. So number one right here is an unsafe solar energy connection. So at the backfeed point into the home. Okay, so the way that this problem shows up oftentimes is with a damaged solar breaker. So if the breaker is not functional or when it's not opposite of the main breaker, or obviously loose wires. I mean, that's never good in any scenario. But like a backfeed breaker that's in the wrong spot is what we've seen by far the most common thing in this category here. We do see sometimes utility meters like if maybe, this is not very often that they wouldn't be seated correctly, but it could, and that might be an indication if there is a missing or broken reader ring seal. So that's important that that's there. Also on the line side tap, that could show up in the form of loose wire connections, tapped in different ways. So if you've got instead of it tapped in the same spot in the same, different ways, different places, different methods, that's not good. They should be done in the same way, same length of wire, that kind of thing. And then any kind of overheating or corrosion with any kind of electrical component. So the way that shows up is that all solar breakers should be 2-pole, right? All of them, all solar in residential works off of 240 volts. And so we want to make sure that we've got 2-pole, 240 amp breakers. Or 240 volt breakers. And so we want to make sure that if they, for example, like here, this one is missing the bridge, that's a problem. So if this guy has a 20 amp and a 20 amp, those are two 20 amp single pole breakers now. And that could, in theory, damage the inverter. But maybe not, but certainly something that should be called out and corrected. The other issue is if it is, again, too close to the breaker. So the main breaker, the solar breaker and the main electrical breaker on a solar or on a main electrical panel are going to be the breakers that have the most energy flowing through them or the most heat flowing through them. And so all of these systems are engineered for them to be opposite of each other. If you notice, all of these little labels here say, do not relocate this overcurrent protection device. And the reason for that is they do not want these next to each other because that could compromise the integrity of the bus bar because you get too much heat flowing through it. And so in this scenario, this is a center fed, so is this. Even just these this is the end of the bus bar here. This breaker here should have been relocated here. That's where it should have been located. These two should have been relocated, put next to the main, and that would have made it compliant. Same thing with this, the water heater breaker there. That should have been relocated. The solar breaker should be at the bottom of the bus bar. So it should be at the top or the bottom, opposite of the main breaker. And if it's a center fed, it should just be as far away as possible from that main breaker. So that's the rule of thumb on those. That is code. I mean, that is like an important rule because, again, we don't want to compromise the bus bar. The whole job of the bus bar is to, ultimately melt if there is a problem to prevent a fire. But we don't want to unjustly, or, we don't compromise that integrity of that. So things to watch out for. On this solar, on this one, this is again a meter collar here. The solar breaker is backfeeding here. I think it's this breaker, that one right there. That seal is broken. You can't see it super well in that photo, but that seal is broken. That's something that should be, at least noted. What's it called? The utility company should come out and reseal that just in case someone was messing with it or whatever. They don't want, anybody messing with their stuff. So, just again, those are common ways that this does show up. And then these are ways that it shows up in the right way. Okay, examples of a good one. So this is a solar backfeed breaker at the bottom of the bus bar. The top is up here, like this main breaker here is up top there. So labeled, it's all good there. Here, that is seated well. This is a meter collar. Here, this is a good example of a line side tap. These are the two solar lines here that are backfeeding into the home's electrical system. They're using the same methodology for tap in the same location, in the same way with the same wire length. So again, just to give you some examples of what that looks like and describing, a right way. Now, a comment for this. So if the solar breaker was installed too close to the main breaker, this would be a good comment for it. Solar breaker was installed in the main electrical panel too close to the main breaker, posing a risk of overheating the bus bar. Recommend evaluation and correction by a licensed electrician to relocate the solar breaker to a safe position. So we've identified the issue, why that's an issue, who they can contact about that, and what the possible resolution there is. So again, all of the comments will be structured in that way for these. Okay, hopefully that gives you an idea as to how they might resolve this potential problem that you might encounter. All right, so the next problem, missing solar labels. All right, with the labels, what we should see is the solar backfeed breaker should be labeled, okay? When that's not there, that's not good. If there's no label present, if it's a handwritten label, or if it's labeled, the wrong breaker is labeled in the wrong way, or just in any way. Then on the utility meter or on the main electrical panel, or essentially near that meter, there should be marking indicating that there is solar on this home. Okay, so it shouldn't be painted over, it shouldn't be sun faded or removed. If there's been a main panel upgrade, that should be removed off of the old panel and put on the new. Anyways, labeling should remain to indicate to first responders, electricians, or anyone else that's going to be interacting with this home's electrical system that there is a power plant on this home. So the conduit coming down off of the roof down to that, like I showed you in that one photo, or those photos of the side of the home, those electrical, the electrical conduit should be labeled, indicating that that is essentially power that is not behind a solar or some sort of overcurrent protective device, a breaker. Anyways, okay, so this is examples of how that does go wrong. So, standard looking panel here, but this is a solar home, and there is no more label on here. There's no indication that there is solar on this home. Here looks like this was probably a main panel upgrade. If you notice the panel, the dead front here is looking awfully nice. So we see the solar label on there, but again, it doesn't say do not relocate. It just says solar. So not an official sticker. That's not good. Here, this labor breaker is labeled, but if you notice, we got two single pole breakers here, 220 amp single pole breakers. And the problem with that is they actually look like they're not the same kind of breaker. So I don't think it's a faulty breaker. It could be, but most likely this is not the solar breaker at all. So again, just incorrectly labeled. And then here we've got missing conduit label stickers. So, again, we wouldn't want to tie, your AC into these DC lines or something, make for a bad day. Anyways, all right. So that's again, examples of that. This does not have to be painted to match, but there should be some kind of an indication that this is PV. Okay, and this is obviously examples of the right way. So good labels here. Again, it doesn't have to be riveted, but oftentimes municipalities will require that, or whatever, counties or different jurisdictions may require rivets, but oftentimes they just want a sticker or a plaque or something that would indicate permanently that there is solar, that's the solar breaker. And then labeling, again, it can be yellow, it can be red. Sometimes it's a map of the solar array. Sometimes it's just, warning, energy production on site. There's different types of stickers depending on what different jurisdictions require. But pretty universally, it's red and yellow. And then these are either red and yellow. These are what the labels look like on the conduit going up to the roof. So in the event that there was missing conduit sticker, I would say electrical conduit located on the side of the home for the solar system does not have any labels, posing a safety concern. Recommend to add solar labels to ensure there's no unsafe electrical connections that are made directly to the solar equipment. All right, okay, moving on to the next one. Solar panels are located in the fire code setbacks. All right, so what the fire code setbacks are essentially is a walkway or a lane that firemen can traverse the roof safely with the solar panels. And so they've set up in the National Electric Code very clear direction on this. And so I want to try to give this to you in terms of a best practices so that we can understand what we're looking for on this when you're on, inspecting a home with solar on it. There should not be solar, there should be a 3 foot or 18 inches on each side of the ridge walkway on the ridge of the roof. And on the rake edge of the roof, not the drip edge, but the rake edge of the roof, at least one side of each solar array should have an entry point that they can get up on the roof and walk safely. That should be a 3 foot walkway there where they can safely walk up on the roof. So those are the parameters for that when that's being honored there. Then if you notice here, there is no fire code violation here as long as it goes right to the drip edge but not past. So no panel should be protruding past any point on the roof, but it is totally fine if they do go right to the drip edge of the roof. So again, this is rake edge, ridge of the roof. That's what we were looking for there. So these are examples when it is not correct. And I don't always necessarily recommend that these be moved because, again, you have to take into consideration, making new penetrations in the roof. And so sometimes if it's egregious, that's probably when to call it out. But just again, probably follow like your best judgment on this because again, like here, this solar here, like there's plenty of walkway here and there's other points. So I'm probably not going to make this a big deal. But again, that is a point where, this is under 18 inches here. Here, this is a system that was installed in 2010. There wasn't even that fire code in place at that time. That was when firefighters were like getting up on roofs and saying, hey, if we need to chop into the ridge of the roof, then we need to be able to have space for that. So that's when those fire codes started to be written. But here again, the rake edge too close. You can see also here, that's like causing shading problems. When solar gets shaded like that, it doesn't just reduce it a little bit, it'll shut them down completely if, half of the panel is being shaded. So over shading can be a problem. So these panels for most of the day may never produce. So anyway, these on both sides for different reasons, there's a problem with that install there. Again, here, if that's 18 inches up there, I mean, this is actually not a real image. This is just a computer image there, but one of these is just too close there. We should have at least one rake edge of the roof. Maybe that's 18 inches, maybe it's not. But again, so you can see what that would look like on this. So the example of a comment to fix this if it was egregious, solar panels were installed too close to the rake edge of the roof, obstructing safe roof access for firefighters. Recommend correction that a qualified solar professional adjust the position of the solar panels to allow for safe roof access. And that can be done without having to redo roof penetrations. Not super easy, but it is definitely feasible with making some adjustments to the rail and whatnot. But again, unless it's going to be a serious safety concern, I don't know that I'm going to always recommend this. But again, just so you know kind of what that would look like in terms of making a recommendation like that. Okay, number 4, trees casting shade on solar panels. This is a problem, especially obviously, maybe not as much in Arizona, but even in Arizona, we do have trees, maybe not as much at some places, but this is how it becomes a problem. Okay, so hopefully use this rule of thumb to make a judgment call on whether there's a problem or not. Remember that in the northern hemisphere where we reside, the sun comes up in the east, it tracks across the southern part of the sky, and then sets in the west. And so solar, it can be shaded when there are trees on the east, south, and west side of the home. When you got trees on the north and side of the house, there's just never an issue. So unless you've got it over, laying over the system, that could be an exception to that. But This is our zone where it can be problematic. This is not typically a problem. You see, these are small trees. Think about like shade as an issue when you think about rise over run. Like I think it's geometry where, if you've got a tall tree next to a short house that's close, you got a problem. But if it's for a tall tree that's far away from a home, maybe it's not an issue. And that's kind of obviously going to be a judgment call on that. But a nice rule of thumb too is like northeast, south, and west here, the compass rose is always like that. I think by default with Google Maps, so if you open up your phone, you're not sure, you can kind of see that. But all of the imagery, at least in our software, as well as most mapping softwares, default to north. And so you're trying to figure out what that looks like, but you can always get out a compass and figure out what side of the roof. So when this does show up as a problem, this is what it look like. So here we've got trees to the east of the home that are probably going to shade it a little bit in the morning. This tree here is a pretty big tree and most likely going to shade most of this system until maybe 11 a.m., depending on different parts of the year. But that system is not going to be producing. And as a buyer, I would want to know that this tree is causing a problem for me. So it's things like that. I think this is the image on one of our first slides, but that right there is a problem that most people would not recognize. And so that's why we're trying to give you this information. So that way you guys are now armed with what's needed to help advise buyers, or at least included this in part of your inspection. So this one here, this is a tree that's directly to the south of the home. And like until like 4 o'clock, this system does not get production. And so again, like I would want to know that I'm only getting 30% of my possible production. And actually, I'll show you another photo of this one. This tree is actually causing more problems than just shade. But this is directly west of a home, but also the tree branch is now growing over top of the roof, which can cause issues. But also for the solar, the reason that's an issue is I've seen tree branches that swing in the wind and then, impact that solar. Now it breaks the solar and anyways, we have to replace that. So again, kind of information that I would want to know if I was buying a home with a tree next to it with solar on it. All right, trees. So tall trees to the south of the home are shading the solar panels. With that problem, I would state that there are trees to the south of the home that are shading the panels, reducing the energy output of the system. Recommend trimming or replacing the trees with smaller trees as necessary to maximize solar energy production, or do nothing, but at least they now know a possible remedy if that is something that they want to take advantage of. Okay, number 5, loose solar wires under the solar panels. Okay, when this one shows up, this is what it looks like. So wire management is an important part of solar installation process, but some companies cut corners and they go with cheap little zip ties. And when those zip ties give out after 5 or 6 or 10 years, this is what you see, a spiderweb mess under the solar. And if you, depending on where you live, there could be snow that's catching on these, rodents that get in there, birds, whatever, debris, balls, tree limbs, all sorts of stuff can get in here. Wires are really not meant to be tugged on or pulled on or have stress on. So these should be nice and high and tight and secure to the system. This is poor wire management. This is a problem. And this can take your 50-year panel and turn it into a 20-year panel. So this is not like a huge safety concern, but it is a longevity issue for them. Now, the way that this would show up in a good way, if you notice this one here, like there looks like, I think there's one grounding wire there that's slightly coming down, but you should see daylight under the solar panels from the ground. Where here, you can see the difference between the two, one versus the other. So anyways, like that's a problem, not a problem. So that's, again, where you can kind of see hopefully a judgment call on what that might look like. On the underside of the array, that's what they look like. They're, again, they're usually tied and secured up against the rail or on the outsides of the panel, depending on what the wiring configuration is under the array. But either way, nothing should be touching the roof that's not supposed to be. So unless it's meant to be a penetration point or something that's intentional, you don't want stuff hanging down on your roof. All right. So in those instances, this solar wires hanging down, resting on the roof material, I would say loose and improperly secured wires under the solar panels can negatively impact the solar panel's longevity. Recommend securing those wires with UV-resistant material to improve the solar system useful remaining life. And again, I'll just reiterate to you in the beginning of the slideshow that QR code has got, they've got all of these inside of that ebook that we put up on there, and we can put that up again. But that's, all of this stuff is documented in there if you're trying to get this stuff down. So I put all this stuff together in one spot for you guys if you want to go back and review it, or, have it for your own records. Okay, problem number 6, improper roof penetrations. All right, so we talked about your mounting equipment and that roof penetration point. This is where what it looks like on the underside of the array when it goes awry. So what is happening here? What we want when we're installing a solar system on a roof that's going to be a penetration point like this with the lag screw that's not into sheeting, but into the structural member. That should not be that. So it should be pre-drilled into the rafter, and then there's obviously this rafter's got a couple issues there, but that anchor point should have been tied into that rafter. Here it's exiting. This right here is an example of there was a couple pre-drilled holes right here, and where you don't see the lag screw, you do see the leak right under the array, right where there is a penetration point, and it's quite obvious that it was caused by the solar installer. So this, again, is kind of how you can tell whether or not there's a problem with the penetration points. And why this is a problem is, one, structural. It's creating not as tight of a securing point as what the engineers intended. And so with solar, what our biggest concern is wind uplift. It's like if you're holding a sheet of plywood in the wind, it's like a sail. And that's really what's happening with the solar. We want to make sure that it is secure to the roof, because when it is, it's quite strong. But when it's not, you're compromising that. And the sad thing is, I've installed a lot of solar. And just like if you're screwing a pitcher into the wall, into sheetrock, and you screw into the sheetrock and you miss that stud, that screw just sits there and spins in the sheetrock. That's exactly what's happening there. That installer went zzz, and it didn't go zzz, it went zzz, and it sits there and spins. And so they knew they missed it, but it's unfortunate. So it's just one of those things to be aware of, because now we've created a missed secure point, and we've created a path of travel for water. So there's a couple different issues here. So that's where this really shows up. And this is the kind of thing to be looking for, especially, again, if you're in a newer install, because this is something that can be remedied by the installer if they're still around and still within that warranty period. Got a question, AJ?
We do. Justin
Great.
asks, do you get up on the roof and look under the panels, or do you peer from the roof's edge?
It depends on the install and the roof type and the height of the roof. I will get on the roof when I can, but if someone's using Sprk, a lot of times we can provide support in that. But a lot of inspectors will do this with, your selfie stick or a drone or a ladder where you're peering from the side. So a lot of these things can be observed there. Obviously, these are views you're only going to see in the attic. So in those instances, obviously, you're only going to get this view if you're in the attic. But when we're looking at the roof material, we do try to observe it when we can, from getting on the side of the roof or getting up on the roof. But if not, many of our inspectors do inspections with us using some other method of getting up there. We just want to see on the underside. We want to look at and again, we've got some very specific photos that we look for from an inspector when we're helping them do an inspection.
So is there no weather moisture barrier installed, like caulking or install of a self-screwing install, like washers, for example?
Yeah, there is actually. So here, if you notice, there is this, there should be the correct method. And on the plan set, it does show this, but if you remember the flashing point here, I'll show you here. See this here? This right here has got a grommet built into it. Same thing with this. This is this is like the material, the adhesion material. That's a sealing point. But yeah, so what they're supposed to do is pre-drill the rafter, fill that with the sealant, and then anchor into that. But this has also got a grommet, and the actual penetration point, or the first place where they're gonna have a water intrusion could be here. So the best practice is definitely to use something here. But here, there clearly was no material used. This is just an issue. But yeah, obviously there's going to be different methodologies for this, but each one of these methods does have waterproofing is a big part of the engineering that goes into the anchor points for these.
And are panels considered an advantage for hurricane protection?
I couldn't say that definitively. Um, I've seen hurricanes break solar panels. Now, it's pretty rare, but I've seen that. Um, like where they were laying flat and it broke like 4 of the actual panels, like it blew them out completely. But I'll actually show you the next photo in the reel is this one. So in a hurricane, this is a tornado, so not a hurricane, but a tornado. This is one of my favorite photos of solar because it shows just how strong the racking is when it is installed correctly. So that's a great question because here all the roofing material is gone except for the solar. It's the only thing that's still there. Now you got about 5 or 6 broken panels there, and obviously the solar is going to need to be taken off so the whole roof can be redone on this home. But this is a tornado pathway, and it took everything off but the solar on there. So they are their engineering for them is based off of the regional wind, like max wind load, as well as structurally they're rated for a seismic load. So when they're installed or they're engineered to both a wind and a structural. So for movement, like of the ground, as well as movement of or wind. So anyway, so that's this is how it if there's not issues, again, if you seen a line of penetrations next to this, that would be a problem, where there was not repaired. But sometimes under a flashing there may be some penetration points, but if they fix those correctly, or if they've missed that rafter when they did it once and then they went back and they filled that and then they got it correct and then anchored it, those shouldn't have issues as long as, again, if the repair is done correctly. But it should look like this. There shouldn't be any sign that there is a solar up on that roof. And then the comment here is, the lag bolts visible in the attic next to the rafters under the array. Roof penetrations for the solar attachments are improperly installed, increasing the risk of roof leaks and water damage. Recommend correction by a solar or roofing contractor to properly seal and secure the solar to the home. All right, what you got?
Is it okay to add a piece of 2x6 to the rafter if they miss the rafter with the lag bolt?
No, I don't think so. I mean, that would not be, unless it was engineered for that or something, but the practice is to go back, you take it out, you find that rafter. Now, there are some anchor points that do not require them to anchor into a rafter, and but it usually involves multiple. If it's into the sheathing, for example, or into the material, they're going to then engineer into that additional anchor points that facilitate a stronger connection. So, and if they are then usually they're going to be closer together up on the roof. So all of these things are usually engineered to certain specifications. But again, it's one of those things that it should have been done to specs, but it isn't always the case. And so these are obviously just how to identify like visually, like what's going on, because there's some things that are unseen and you cannot see. But with solar, I'm trying to show again the problems that show up and how we're finding them and what it looks like. All right, number 7, debris that reduces light collection. This is another issue that we're finding. So when there is excessive snow, so over basically 3 inches of snow and more, solar will stop producing power. Dirt deposits from excess snow melt when you got a really dirty snow, and sometimes it'll leave a mud on there. Or, it's not super common, but we have seen that where that kind of builds up. Heavy dust buildup, and we're talking heavy where you can't really see the solar anymore. Excessive bird droppings, moss or mold, organic growth that built up on them. Obviously, higher moisture areas, tree droppings. That one is unfortunately more common. Things like pollen or pine needles or sap or leaves that just pile up on the array. Paint overspray or roofing material that gets up on there. Those can be issues, and these are kind of how those show up. So. In Arizona, for example, we have more pigeons than we do squirrels. But we've also I'll show you the next slide is going to be about squirrels. But this is, again, on top of the panel that reduces light collection. These are these kind of issues that show up. And this one is a minor issue here, this moss growth. But again, in a high moisture area, we see, like, for example, in Hawaii, in certain areas like Kauai that gets the most rain in the country, there is significant growth that happens on those, and they should be cleaned on a more regular basis than another area that just gets moderate rain. So there are definitely areas where there are more regional type of problems than others. This one right here, this is that pine tree that I told you. I'll show you another one of that. This is the array that's on the other side of that roof, right underneath that pine tree, never gets sun. And while that's a shame, it's also now impacting the roof because now under this array, like there's what's pushed that up there is there's now rodents that have now burrowed in under here. And so not only is like this is not actually coming from on top, it's being pushed out the underside by so much under there. So it's hurting the roof. It's causing, this is a major problem right here. These ones ended up getting taken off, roof repair. I mean, this was a significant change to the system. So that right there is a major problem for that home. This here, paint overspray. That's actually more common than I would have thought, but we don't see it every day, but we probably once a month, one will come in with paint overspray. So this can get remedied by simply, it's like cleaning a window. You get up there and manually clean that thing until it's clean, whether that's a scraper or whatever, but it's glass. So you can clean glass however you want. And speaking of cleaning, because a lot of people might think that cleaning is a big part of this. It's really, we don't train much on cleaning because cleaning is kind of a minor issue. But when you do have a major cleaning like this, power spraying, putting manual cleaning on them is fine. What we don't recommend is chemicals in the cleaning process. So if you're just, getting the dust off your solar panels, dish soap and other chemicals, we do not recommend that. A soft bristle brush, think about cleaning a RV. Soft bristle brush, just tap water. That is the best remedy for cleaning solar panels. So that way you don't create some sort of adhesion, leftover, chemical material on theirs that could then cause further shading. But again, you have to have some serious dust to reduce, because normal dust will reduce productive output by 3 to 5%, where this shade obviously is cutting off 100%. This thing is not producing. So shade from a tree is way worse, and actually tree maintenance ends up being way more important than cleaning. So most of the time, the maintenance related to these, which we're going to get to, I'm kind of already showing some of that, but it's really important. So
we have a couple more questions here.
Sure.
Crystal asks, is there a requirement for the roof material age before solar is installed, or will the installer install it on an old roof?
Yeah, they will. I mean, the best practice is a roof should have, minimum 5 years, minimum. That's like, I don't know. I don't love it. I'd rather see at least another 10 years of life on that roof. Most installers, because they're going to have to come out and swap that roof that they install under that, because a lot of times, again, that workmanship warranty, if the roof goes bad and they've put it on, it's up to them to come and take it off. And so that's going to be on them for labor. Most installers, the best practice is not to install on a roof that's got less than additional 10 years of life. But you do see people putting solar on roofs that got a year left, or only a couple of years, or end of life of the roof. And that's just bad practices. At least 10 years is in the solar industry what we try to like. That should be the minimum bar. Obviously, the newer the roof, the better, because then you're going to get the maximum time while it's sitting there. If we're looking at just kind of an average national cost, $200 to $300 per solar panel is the average cost to remove and put the panels back on. Every company is different. I've seen much higher costs than that. Rarely do see it much lower, but that is kind of an average in terms of what the cost per array, or to have panels taken off and then put back on for a re-roof.
And how much snow can the panel hold before it would cause concern?
I've never heard of snow breaking panels, actually. You could stand on a panel if you had to. We don't recommend it. But you got to have a heck of a lot of weight on those. But the nice thing about snow is it's evenly distributed. So again, that racking system is wherever it's installed, they're engineering for max snow load. They're engineering for max wind load as well. Good questions. Okay. So when, clean panels, this is what they look like. A little bit of pollen, not a big deal. That's just, this is probably what an average system looks like. They should just be sitting there on the roof, nice and clean. There shouldn't be a ton of debris on or under them. That's what they should be looking like. Okay. So when they don't, if it was this one, I would say significant amount of pine needles have built up under and above the panels, which is reducing the energy output of the solar. Recommend trimming back or replacing the tree and cleaning the panels to improve the energy output of the array. All right, number 8, moving on, the pest activity on or under the roof. So when we see animals that are hanging out under the solar, deciding they want to chew on the solar lines, just like any other part of the home, squirrels, and rodents, they like to chew. That's not a good thing. If you see that, that's what we'd be looking out for. That's actually a wire sitting on top of a microinverter there. Sometimes we'll get squirrels that are, roosting up under there, birds, that are on or under it. Actually, if you notice there, you got some pest proofing even on this. Usually there's some remediation for this, but sometimes you just get stubborn birds and you got to, there's definitely, there's a few different levels of pest remediation, just like sometimes you'll see like on commercial buildings, they won't just have, they'll have spikes and stuff on the top of their roofs. And, sometimes people will do that, or they'll put little spinning flashers up there to scare the birds away. So there's a few different remediations for this, but this is how that shows up. This is what it should look like when it doesn't have problems. So sometimes birds and squirrels are no problem at all. And oftentimes we see there's no issues. But if you're in an area where there's an issue, it usually shows up. And so the way to avoid that or prevent that or remedy that is with this material. It's called pest mesh or pest proofing. It's got lots of different names, but essentially some sort of a material that creates a barrier that allows the panels to still breathe, but keeps out unwanted guests. And if you're on a wave tile or an S tile roof, that should be cut into the rivets of the roof or into the valleys of that. So if you've got pest mesh and it's just skating along the top of a wave tile roof, that's not good. I mean, I would call that like pest proofing present, but not correctly installed. So anyways, just something to watch out for. In this, if that was the case, bird droppings on the panels and bird nests under the panels, I would say excessive bird droppings on the solar, which can be reduce the amount of energy output of the solar system. Recommend to install pest proofing to discourage roosting and eliminate the ability for birds to go under the solar panels. Let me just quickly comment about this. It's not this install here, but we had an install where this can become a real issue. So one of the things that we do is our inspectors use a clamp-on multimeter. When I say our inspectors that work with Sprk, we teach them how to do this, and we have them measure the productive output of a system. So inspecting systems that are leased are oftentimes, or sometimes more important than inspecting systems that are owned outright, because a lease company is supposed to come out and fix issues or create remedies. Like they're supposed to make sure that system is producing. A buyer took over a home and they just had a lot of bird activity up on the roof. Well, when we took the reading on it, the system had a new inverter on it. So it could have been the inverter, but most likely it was covered in bird poop. And so because there's so much bird poop on it, the system was only producing 40% of what it should be producing. And so it significantly reduced the energy output. And this buyer would have no idea that they were taking over this $200 lease payment that was only producing 40% of what it should. And so where they should have been saving like $300 a month, they were saving like $30 or $40 or $50, whatever. It was a low amount that it was actually impacting their energy bill. And so that would have been really frustrating for them. They did, the inspector caught it. They were able to get it remedied, but oftentimes the lease companies are not out doing these inspections or checking this out. They're happy to take a payment on the equipment when there is an issue, and they're a bank basically. Most solar lease companies where they may have started out as a solar company, oftentimes those get bought in secondhand markets and now owned by a bank, and they're just happy to take the payment until somebody complains. And so this is one of the things that can really help to identify, hey, there's an issue here that needs to be remedied. Oftentimes it takes a third party coming in and giving that homeowner or buyer some power for intervention there. Because, again, they don't know. And so if someone's got problems with performance issues, that could be one of those things that could be impacting it. Anyways, I'm just telling you, that's kind of the kind of impact that this can have on the amount of productive output of the system. Okay, so that's that. The next is solar panels that are not properly secured. This is again where it comes down to a safety issue. This is number one in terms of safety, other than like the electrical connection being compromised in some way. But solar panels that are not properly secured have the opportunity to take flight and create liabilities for homeowners, and that's not good. This is like driving down, like this guy right here, sitting up on this roof, even though there's a parapet there. That's like driving down the freeway with your plywood just sitting in the back of your truck, and you just hope it doesn't fly away. And that's not good. It creates a possible liability, and that's what we want to call out. Anyways, this is definitely the kind of thing that should be remedied. Here, these are the anchor points. Right here, this is a roofer. They went in, re-roofed this house, must have lost some of the bolts for this racking material, and they put in a, whatever, baling wire. That's not an acceptable method of securing a solar system. I can tell you that right now. So, this is a system that has an undermount mount, wasn't secured, whatever reason they didn't finish the install. This one here, this actually, I need to get a picture of this one up for everybody, but it's got a gold X on it. This is a end clamp. It's the only end clamp or panel clamp that I've seen that actually falls off for no reason. It just, like I've seen several installs that have got these panel clamps that are just laying next to the equipment. And obviously that creates a liability. So most of these, they stand firm, but again, there's some out there that don't go the distance. So again, this is something to be watching for. It creates a real liability for homeowners that can really like come to bite them in the butt. I inspected a system when I first started this process, and it was a home for sale. Did an energy reading, everything looked good till we got up on the roof and looked, and half of the solar system was just laying on the rails. Somebody had gone up and done a roof repair and just had set them back on the rails, got them reconnected, and just figured they were fine sitting there. I mean, that's a serious liability for that buyer, because the next major windstorm that comes through is in San Diego. Like that system, that's whatever, it was like 11 panel liability worth of liability there. So those are the kind of things that really can create a real safety concern for people. When it is properly secured, this is what they should look like. These should be tight. They should be secure. Usually there's 4 per panel. There's 4 anchor points. This is called an end clamp. This is a mid clamp. So the end clamps should be usually over the or on the underside. So each of these panels are on there. I don't have it in here. I just saw this the other day, and again, it's not really on the top 10 list, but sometimes this is not the style, but there is a style of clamps that if it's over tightened, it actually can peel the seal back on this rail, and that can let moisture in. So if you ever see a solar panel that looks like it's full of water in there or a bunch of moisture on the inside, that could be also a compromised panel because of poor panel clamps. So that's over tightening of clamps, which is extremely rare. I've only seen it a couple times, but still something that could happen. So just, again, these are things to be aware of, something to watch for, but far more frequent is missing or loose clamps. So comment for this one, one of the solar panel clamps is no longer securing the panels on the roof, which presents a serious safety concern in high winds. Recommend for a solar professional to secure or replace the clamps, ensure that the solar system remains safely mounted to the property. Okay, next up is broken panels. Then this is last. So if, these are what they look like. Again, tempered glass. This is a baseball. I think this is a golf ball. This is what hail impacts look like. Hail that breaks solar panels are hail that's larger than a golf ball. So unless you're in a state like, Midwest, Colorado to, maybe, Texas and Oklahoma in that area where you get much larger hail, that this can certainly become an issue. But again, that's what breaks them. But oftentimes, just like they have, a lot of times hail damage is covered under their homeowner's policy for hail, but not golf. So the most common thing that does break solar panels is golf balls. And so like right here, this is an example of an impact of a golf ball. That's what a broken panel looks like. That's what a clean one looks like, even though it's a little dusty there, no cracks, but always, they don't ever just chip. They completely, shatter. Yes.
Oh, no, I'm just, we're at the wrapping up point. So I'm just
Cool.
on.
Cool. All right. So that's the last one there. One of the panels is broken glass, which greatly reduces the output and useful remaining life. Recommend for a panel to replace a broken panel to ensure the solar system maximizes energy output for years to come. All right, so there's our 10 things. Basically, yeah, we were flying through, having a good time talking through this. So, like I said, I could go on for this for a while. I'm just gonna kind of buzz through a couple other slides here. These are your maintenance items: trim trees, clean the panels, have them inspected every couple of years. Those are proactive, and then reactive are going to be replacing inverters, obviously secure clamps or wires, and then removing debris. So these are things oftentimes, again, that those third parties can help take care of and create awareness around, and ultimately oftentimes are responsible for. So those are those. And then this is like a case study where we have this, but again, we're kind of out of time. So as I've got all kind of cruise through this, is just again what the inspection report that we help inspectors create at Sprk, and some problems that can come up. I think this one is an example of the loose clamps and a broken panel on here. But yeah, that's what that looks like. We help show what the installer details are and that kind of thing, and transfer details on our reports for them. So yeah, basically that's it there. And then the last thing I'll just say is that we're a platform that does help inspectors to inspect solar, add it into your inspection process. Basically, we help them use our app to inspect the solar and add it in to their inspection. You guys inspect the solar using our app. We write the reports, get it back to you usually within 24 hours. Anyway, so this is what the app looks like. And anyways, that's our process. We train you guys. Inside of our app, inside of our platform, we have further trainings for inspectors to give you guys, again, the resources needed to add this into your business and then certify you for that, for solar. And so, we're obviously, grateful for InterNACHI and making that available. But definitely you guys as inspectors can be a key value add to the inspection, to help provide, answers to that. So anyways, that's our process there. Again, a couple slides about how our process works. You guys collect it, we generate it. Again, with Sprk, we are able to measure the energy output with the multimeter and then give that homeowner not just a visual inspection, but also an analyzed report that most inspectors are adding in. This is what the inspection report looks like. Usually most inspectors are selling that for $300 to $400. The cost of the inspector with us is $30. We actually have an offer with you guys too. I'll just script in this. We've got a couple different reports we generate, but this is our normal plan. It's $20 to get started with us. It's free to get started, but we have an offer with you guys where we will provide 10% discount lifetime, and it's 30 days or 60 days free instead of 30 with us. And then we give you guys everything that you would need to add this into your business and provide homeowners the key tools that they need, and buyers and sellers to be able to add solar inspections in, and give you guys what you guys need to make it a profitable add-on ancillary service. So anyways, that's our offer for you guys, and again for joining with us. And then we have basically that's it there. If you're interested in checking that out, there is a discount code. It's NACHI18 when you go to register with Sprk. So if you go to our website and register, also on the, I think, InterNACHI website, there's a special offer on there too. But those that watch this call, we set that up for you, that discount code NACHI18. So that's that. And again, you scan the QR code, or you can just go to our website, sparkhome.com. We've got all sorts of information on there for you guys. So.